In the dust-filled heat of Mesopotamia, at the very edge of the known world, an empire trembled, not from a foreign enemy, but from the anger of its own victorious soldiers. When the most powerful army in the world refused to march, one voice rose against thousands. A single speech turned rebellion into remorse. This is the story of the moment an empire nearly fractured down the words that stitched it back together. They had followed their leader across deserts, mountains, and kingdoms that stretched farther than any map had ever dared to imagine. They had given their blood, their youth, and their lives to the dream of conquering the earth. But now, at the city of Opis, that dream had turned bitter. For years, they had marched, fought, and bled. Victories had become a rhythm, conquest, a language they all understood. But on the banks of the Tigris, the rhythm broke. The men who once cheered his name now stood with folded arms and hardened eyes. Their silence was louder than any battlefield charge. These were not frightened recruits. They were seasoned warriors, men who had survived storms, deserts, and 1,000 blades. Yet exhaustion had carved deep into their hearts, and resentment had begun to take root. Glory had soured into suspicion. They questioned not just the next march, but the purpose behind it all. They wondered whether that glory still belonged to them, or if it had become the possession of one man alone. The unity that once held them together trembled, weakened by years of distance from home and the weight of endless campaigns. The world watched armies crumble under foreign foes. But here, on this scorched earth, an empire risked falling to something far more dangerous, its own disillusioned heart. And for the first time, an army undefeated by any force on the planet stood ready to defy the one man they believed could never be opposed. The air thickened with tension. Not the tension of battle, but the tension of betrayal. A fracture threatened to split an empire from within. What happened next would become one of the most defining moments in the history of leadership, because instead of responding with force, instead of bowing to their demands, he walked straight into the heart of the mutiny. Alone. No guards, no throne, no weapons, just the weight of truth and the authority of a lifetime carved in conquest. He faced thousands, like a man facing a storm. Through the sea of anger and uncertainty, a single figure stepped forward, meeting the fury of his own soldiers with a calm that felt almost defiant. And when he spoke, his words did not echo with anger, but with something far more devastating: remembrance. Instead of demanding obedience, he confronted them with truth. He reminded them of the deserts they had crossed together, of the kings they had toppled, of the nights when the fires of victory warmed their frozen bodies. He spoke of battles they survived together, of nights spent on blood-soaked ground, of victories that belonged to every single man standing before him. He reminded them of how he had marched beside them, bled beside them, risked death beside them. Each word peeled away the distance that power had created, stripping away the myth and showing them the man who had carried their hopes as fiercely as he carried his own ambition. The speech was not gentle. It was not comforting. It was a mirror held up to their rebellion, forcing them to see not a ruler towering over them, but a leader who had given everything he asked of them. In his voice lived the memory of every hardship they had endured, every crown they had seized, every wound they had carried home. And in that raw moment, the anger cracked. The defiance faltered. The shouts faded into a heavy, trembling silence. Memories they had buried beneath anger began to surface, the battles won shoulder to shoulder. The fallen brothers whose names echoed in every breath, the promise they had once sworn to uphold together. Shame crept in, quiet but overwhelming, as they realized the magnitude of what they had nearly destroyed. This was more than a disagreement. It was the breaking of a bond forged across continents. The mutiny that had erupted with shouts now dissolved. The rebellion collapsed under the weight of loyalty rediscovered. Warriors hardened by years of conquest began to weep openly. The soldiers who had stood in defiance now found themselves facing not a commander, but the reflection of their own journey. They stepped forward not with defiance, but with remorse, begging for forgiveness. The army that had stood on the edge of fracture now knelt, united once more, not by fear, but by the undeniable truth of a leader as devotion to those who had carried his vision across the world. What could have shattered the greatest empire on earth instead forged a loyalty stronger than fear, stronger than force, stronger even than glory. In the aftermath of that reckoning, the empire stood not because of threats, but because truth had reached where commands could not. The mutiny could have shattered everything they had built together, yet it instead revealed the depth of their connection. For a brief moment, the greatest army the world had ever seen rediscovered its purpose. The soldiers who had marched across continents remembered why they had chosen to follow, and the leader who confronted them proved that power anchored in honesty can withstand even the fiercest storm. The Opis moment endures as a reminder that the strongest empires are not forged solely by victory, but by the courage to face one's own people, to speak without fear, and to reign not with iron, but with conviction. It was here that rebellion turned into reconciliation. An unempire once trembling stood unbroken not by conquest, but by the force of a speech that transformed defiance into devotion. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as powerful as we did, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more incredible moments from history. We'll see you in the next one.